Let's talk Persona. We haven't in a while, have we? I've been playing through Persona 5 Strikers for the first time finally on my Twitch channel, and I've been restarting a playthrough of Persona 3 FES, which I honestly have still yet to finish, but it's been so long, so I decided to restart the game. I guess it's a little harder since I've seen the movies that didn't hype me up too much for the game itself, and that I'm trying to take each of these games slow, but simultaneously trying to get through them so I can get to Shin Megami Tensei 5. But I've heard a lot of voices over the years that wanted to see more Persona content, and you guys are finally getting that. It's not that I didn't want to make any, it's more so that I was concerned with consuming Persona content so I could understand what I'd be doing. While we're at it, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, the like button, and the little bell. Y'all have heard it before, you know what that means. It'll help me a lot. So this came to mind. The idea of the silent protagonist the series has done from its inception. From Naoya Toudou, the boy with an earring, to Ren Amamiya, the leader of the Phantom Thieves of Heart. This series has done its fair share of differences with the silent protagonist in its 25-year lifespan. Some choices made the characters better, some didn't, but they're still the guys and sometimes the girls that we love. Games tend to have silent protagonists so we, the players, can project ourselves onto them, and sometimes, in Persona's case, the illusion of choice, or sometimes lack of choice, we're given at certain crossroads of the story may not align with our ethos, but I feel there are certain games in the series that do this better than others. So let's take a quick look at each protagonist and see which game did it best. Starting off with Megami Ibun Roku Persona starts at 3, we have Naoya Toudou, the canonical manga name for the protagonist that we'll be using for the rest of this video. As the first game in the series, Persona 1 is about as bare bones as the series can get. Although difficult at times, it's more due to its dungeon crawling nature and high encounter rate rather than actual difficult battles. Most of the game is spent in combat, and there's very little actual storytelling compared to the following games. That said, we don't get to learn all that much about Naoya as a person, which for a silent protagonist is probably exactly how much we want to learn. However, it does come to light that Naoya had a twin brother that died at a younger age in a tragic accident, being struck by a truck, causing grief and mental anguish for the Toudou siblings' mother. Naoya goes on to manifest a shadow created from the guilt harbored inside related to his brother Kazuya's death. For a silent protagonist in a game whose remake has about 15 minutes of cinematic cutscenes, being the first in a series, that's actually a decent backstory we're looking at. But as far as projecting yourself onto the protagonist, it seems like there's a bit too much going on. Sure, some players may relate to the events Naoya had suffered through, but many may just see him as a character in the story like every other character. Now, Persona 2 has kind of a weird thing going on with it, where the protagonist of Innocent Sin, while silent, becomes talkative in Eternal Punishment, and vice versa. But we'll actually be skipping over the protagonist of Eternal Punishment, Maya Amano, as she was a developed character prior to her role as a protagonist, so her story and attitude are already fairly fleshed out. Instead, we'll be focusing on the original Persona 2 protagonist, Tatsuya Suou from Innocent Sin. Much like Naoya from Persona 1, there's some tragic stuff going on behind Tatsuya's projected tough exterior, like a family he doesn't get along with and a habit of striking a lighter given to him by a long-lost friend, Jun Kurosu. As kids, we end up detached from those we care about a lot, whether it's because we move or they move, or families break apart due to a variety of reasons. But as much as some people try to hide the terrible feeling of loss from us at a young age, we're going to experience it eventually. Some younger than others, some at an oddly older age than others. It's also fairly common to have issues within the family where at some point in time someone isn't getting along with someone else. Tatsuya also manifests a shadow that attempts to convince him that he hates Jun Kurosu. Tatsuya nails the relatability section of this test and is easy to project onto, I believe, but there's one selling point that I think Tatsuya has over all of the protagonists in the series. You can decide his sexual orientation. In a series which would later allow you to romance your social links, it's kind of odd that there's no gay options for the protagonists. But Tatsuya was allowed this choice with Jun Kurosu, so if that's your cup of tea, Tatsuya actually has you covered. It would be great to see a modern re-release of this game complete with a new social link system added into the next game, but I can settle for the PSP versions now that a full English patch is available for Eternal Punishment. Finally, In case you've been waiting, we're starting the series off with Persona 3. Okay, I know what you're thinking. It's about time that I stop that joke, isn't it? We all know that Persona starts with 5. Anyway, Makoto Yuki from Persona 3 is very similar to Naoya, having his parents stripped away from him a decade before the story begins in the game. He also sports your classic antisocial boys look from the early to mid 2000s, probably listening to My Chemical Romance or AFI through his headphones. He's not the talkative type. His female counterpart from Persona 3 Portable, however, shares his backstory but has an opposite personality of his. The downside to both of these characters, and the characters I'll go on to talk about from Persona 4 and 5, were mentioned before while we talked about Tatsuya. While the female protagonist of Persona 3 does have similar social link dialogue in some cases to Makoto, there's no actual setting to make her date the female characters. But it's the closest modern games go to actually making this sort of step. Persona 4's Yu Narukami is probably the most projectable protagonist so far. While he does go on to talk in future installments of the game, such as Persona 4 Arena and Dancing All Night, we're only going to be focusing on his primary appearance in Persona 4. Much like Makoto and Tatsuya, Yu is a transfer student enrolling in his school, but it's set in a small town and he comes from the big city. Now, I might not have the best opinion on this sort of thing, but living in New York, and let me be clear, not New York City, it's super common to see people moving from the city up into smaller rural areas. I can imagine, due to the costs of the city itself, it's probably very similar to other places in the country and even the world. In fact, that's about all the game gives us on Narukami's existence. His entire personality is shapeable through your choices as a player. The only downside is his romance options are entirely heterosexual, which is a shame because his best friend Yosuke was meant to be a romance option but ended up getting cut from the game, which not only does great things for the protagonist, but contextualizes a lot of Yosuke's behavior throughout the story of Persona 4. And now, the moment you've been dying to get to, Ren Amamiya, the most current protagonist of the Persona franchise from Persona 5. Unfortunately, just like Naoya and Makoto, Ren's got a lot going on. Being framed for a crime he didn't commit, being taken in for an interrogation and maintaining a cocky attitude throughout the story, bringing us to that illusion of choice I mentioned earlier. I suppose Ren's place in the spectrum of silent protagonists is to be the power fantasy, because that's what he excels at best. It would feel great to be Joker, at least up until you're caught, but then it would feel great again to fight back against what had troubled you in the first place. Like I mentioned with every other character, there's a severe lack of choice with Ren's romance options. Characters like Yusuke and Akechi would have been perfect for that sort of thing. But there's always being hopeful with Persona 6. If anything comes out of the complaints of Atlus being bigoted towards members of the LGBT community, I suppose I hope that's what it brings? More choice for the player? So where does that leave us? Well, in terms of projectable protagonists, I'd say that I think Yu Narukami and Tatsuya Suou nail the job. Maybe not perfectly, but as close to perfect as this series has gotten. There are elements about each character or the game they appear in that prevent them from being a complete blank slate. In fact, if Yu was able to romance Yosuke, I'd consider that he would be number one. But the fact that Tatsuya has more going on behind the scenes than Yu does keeps me from naming him number one as well. Do you think a different character nailed the silent protagonist job better? Well, unfortunately, I'd have to disagree with you. They did their jobs well in their games, but if it's not Yu or Tatsuya, they just exist as characters in the story to me. But leave your opinions down below.